1. Sorry, this is a bit of a rant. I love my mom, but she's an awful person. She suffers from undiagnosed GAD, BPD, and OCD, which has made her increasingly mean-spirited, narcissistic, and just an all-round soul-sucking wretch. My mom, who hasn't worked a job since the 90s, treats my dad like shit, and is always ragging on him as soon as he gets home from work. She'll bitch about him dragging dirt into the house, even though he takes his shoes off at the door. She yells at him for having the TV too loud, even though it's at 11 out of 100, and you can barely hear the dialogue of the show. She complains about everything, and even I can't have a conversation with her without her speaking only in terms of negatives, bringing up something benign like the weather, and she'll complain it's too hot, or it's too cold, or we're in a drought, or we're going to get flooded because of the rain. My dad, on the other hand, is a peaceful old goober who wants nothing more than to work an honest day's wage, try to provide as best he can for my mom, and maybe watch his Stargate shows in peace. Damn right. Well, my mom is addicted to soda. She drinks like 8 cans of pop a day. As you all know, soda is fucking ridiculously expensive these days. My dad, always thinking of my mom, noticed that our local grocer was having a huge buy some, get some free deal on cases of soda. He enlisted my help, and we bought like $300 worth of soda, hitting the store a couple of times to get past the 10 case limit. We went back to my parents' house and started stacking the soda in the basement. Did my mom thank my dad for his bounty of soda? Hell no. She proceeded to rip him a new asshole because he bought 7-Up instead of Fresca. Mind you, the 7-Up was like 5% of the soda we bought. The rest was Pepsi or Coke. I couldn't believe how awful she was being to my poor dad. Cue the PettyRevenge. See, my mom loves to do jigsaw puzzles. She'll sit in her own private TV room for hours, watching shows and completing endless amounts of puzzles. She saves the puzzles when she's done and puts them back in their original box, so she can do them again after enough time has passed that she's forgotten the puzzle. Well, after she blew up on my dad about the soda, I excused myself and went upstairs to use the bathroom. I could still hear her bitching at my dad downstairs, and I stepped into her room to find a semi-completed puzzle sprawled on her desk in front of the TV. I grabbed a single piece from the box and put it in my pocket. Pretty small and petty, I know, but I also know it will drive her nuts that she was just one piece off from completing the puzzle. It's even better knowing she'll realize she's a piece short as she gets down to the last 5 or so pieces and realizes that she doesn't have enough to complete the puzzle. I felt pretty happy about this PettyRevenge and was about to walk out of her room when I thought, fuck it. And I went back in and quickly opened every completed puzzle box I could find and took a single piece out of each one. I hope she slowly goes nuts every time she decides to redo a previously completed puzzle and finds herself short just one puzzle piece. 2. I have 4 sisters. My mom is and always has been mean and neglectful to me. Only me. I'm older now and recognize her lame attempts at making me feel less than. Taking away her power of it now makes me smile. She still always tries to cut me down and keep me separated from my siblings. My mom, classic hoarder, got her claws into an elderly woman who has no family. Mom has acquired gold, rings, etc. from this 91-year-old woman, Pat. Pat has 5 heirloom rings. She wanted my mom, Debbie, to give one to each of us girls since she has no family to pass things on to. There was a plan to hand out the rings to us when we were all together. Super Bowl, one of my sissies couldn't make it, so the rings weren't handed out since we weren't all there. 2 weeks later, a brunch is planned for a day that I am slammed. I have 4 kids to take to 2 separate softball practices I coach. There's no way I can make this brunch and get 4 kids to practice by 10:30. They all still go to brunch. Later in our group chat, I see my mom post Pat's contact card and tell everyone to mail a thank you letter to Pat. I wrote thank you for what? And Sis writes back, the rings. I ask why they were given out when I wasn't there. My mom hates when I show people how she treats me instead of just staying quiet. Mom responds, you should have been there. When my mom gets busted doing shady stuff to me, she never wants anyone to know. so she will always private message me and try to get me off the chat so she can bully me. Debbie wants to appear one way to groups and people, so responds to me individually, so she can be mean with no one seeing it. Sure enough, I get an instant message off the thread, Debbie asking if I'm home so she can drop off whatever ring is left. No thanks, Blackheart, I'm good. Having the contact card that Debbie posted, I pick up my phone and call Pat to explain who I am. She knows I'm one of Debbie's kids, as my mom will always talk about her 6 kids, but people outside of my siblings don't know how I'm treated by Debbie. Pat and I chat for a while, and she's a lovely old lonely southern woman. I tell her thank you for giving all my sisters rings, that it was very sweet. She said she was so happy to give them to us, as she has no one, and is getting very old. She asked about my ring, which one I chose. Here's where I told Pat everything, that I didn't get a ring, that my mom is terrible to me both growing up and now. I wanted Pat to know the truth for the next time Debbie calls her, trying to act like a saint. Pat says she hopes she can be there for me to atone for my mother's shortcomings. I tell Pat that I'm not only okay and perfectly happy, but a minimalist and don't want anything. The only thing I wanted was to talk and say thank you. It felt so good talking to her. I jumped right back into the group chat and told everyone that I had just gotten off the phone with Pat. You can bet Debbie's blood went cold reading that I, the mistake child, had called Pat. Debbie rattled, I'm sure, wrote back quickly in group chat saying, maybe you should wait to call until you have something to say. Like, wait to call her until after I have a ring to thank her for. All I responded in group chat was, already called, thanks, with a heart. 3. For context, I'm a 21-year-old woman and have an older father, 80 years old, and I am the result of my dad's second marriage. I have several older half-siblings, but we're going to focus on Lauren, 60. I was warned about Lauren from my other older siblings, but no one would ever really tell me what she did. Not even my dad. Her own mom asked me, are you sure you want to meet her? When I called to ask her for details, my mom did state that it seemed Lauren only ever called Dad when she wanted something. Even when he broke his leg in several places and had to have surgery, she didn't call him until 3 weeks later when he was out of the hospital, and she lives in the same city. The small time she did call was to ask for things, and if she didn't get, she would repeatedly ask until Dad gave in. Despite this, I still wanted to meet her. I felt like listening to the gossip wouldn't be giving her a fair chance, and while my family is not close, I've always wanted us to be. I met Lauren over Facebook just over a year ago, and started noticing that more people in my family were unfriending her. I shrugged it off until yesterday. Yesterday, I posted a photo of my dad and I at my graduation from high school, and a while later I got a message from Lauren. She told me that I should be careful about posting photos of our family, especially of our dad, because there are people she's friends with that don't like him. He owned a business, and his employees screwed people over while he was out of town, but since he owned the business, he took the fall. I told her that I was aware, but kept the photos up. She then responded that she didn't want any photos of her family on Facebook, regardless of whether or not it was hers. The thing is, my dad had given me permission to post them, so I called him to make sure. Unbeknownst to me, my sister had called him and told him I was publishing private family information to Facebook, as in addresses, phone numbers, etc. The most private information I've shared is about our great-great-grandma, who died over 100 years ago, who I've been doing research on for the past several years. My dad was livid at the thought, but after explaining what happened, he apologized for jumping the gun. Now comes the petty revenge. Since she didn't want her friends to see photos of our dad, I unfriended her, but not before changing my profile picture to another graduation photo of my dad and I. I then sent her the following message. Hey girl, that's cool that you don't want family photos on your Facebook. However, I got Dad's permission to post my photos of him and I together, so I will post what I please. It's not like I'm posting family gossip. Though I implore you not to fuck with me again, because I have no problem posting family gossip about someone who does me dirty. You know for a fact I am not posting anything personal other than family history about dead people that I worked for years to learn and have a right to share. If you have friends that would be upset with you simply because they saw a photo your 21-year-old half-sister posted, then maybe you should get better friends. Their idiocy sounds like a skill issue. For someone bordering on 60, you sure act like a teenager, trying to dictate someone's posts who you never even met in person, nor have you made any attempt to meet me before my adulthood. Couldn't be me, girly pop. I actually care about my family. All she said was, "Whatever, I don't read long texts. Unfriendly me, please." Which is hilarious because she sent me 2 essays about why I shouldn't post photos of our dad. My response to her was, "You can't read them, but you sure can write them. See you next Tuesday." 4. So I have worked at an outdoor retail store for a little over 2 years now. The employee turnover rate at my job is pretty high, with most lasting only a few months. Thus I have become one of the more knowledgeable employees, and I work primarily in the bike shop. Now, the bike shop manager also happens to be head bike tech, meaning he is often busy repairing and building bikes. He has taken a liking to me, and as such I do most of the part ordering, repair check-ins, and restocking and merchandising of the department floor. One of the few employees who has been working longer than me bought himself a brand new fat bike last spring. He lives in a small apartment, and so he stores his bike at the shop, as the bike shop manager and store owner allow. However, it is meant to be stored in the warehouse, not on the shop floor itself. Well, one day we got a large order of bikes that we wanted to put out on the floor. I went and asked this employee if he could move his bike to the warehouse, or I could for him. He told me, "Yes, you can bring it to the warehouse, but I don't want dirt on the tires. It needs to stay shiny and clean for the winter. Also, please put it in a corner or something, where it won't get dinged or scratched." Well, I am a kind and accommodating co-worker. However, I don't fancy having to carry this large bike 500 feet or so to the warehouse, so I decided that I'd make sure that no one would scratch his bike. In our warehouse, half of it is dedicated to backstock, and the other half has our paddle sports department. In the backstock side, half of that is large shelves like you'd see at Costco or other large grocery stores, and the other is bike racks for our stock that won't fit on the floor. The top of these shelves are usually left empty as we don't have a forklift, and there usually isn't enough merchandise to facilitate needing that extra space. This open space, 20 feet off the ground, is where my malicious compliance took place. Carefully, I climbed the ladder to the top shelf, carrying his bike on my back. Once up there, I carefully tied it to the post that was left up there, and stood it up on some cardboard boxes, so as not to dirty the tires. I then climbed down and moved the ladder. I then continued about my work and finished the merchandising. My bike shop manager has a great sense of humor, and so when he went to the warehouse to grab a bike in for repairs, he about lost it when he saw what I had done with the bike. He came back to the store laughing his head off and agreed that this was a justly earned prank. My co-worker, who owned the bike, on the other hand, did not find it quite as funny. He is shorter than me, and so he could not reach high enough when on top of the ladder to get it down. When I left in the fall for school, it was still up there, and I imagine he will have to get another co-worker to get it done for him. 5. The United Methodist Church is separated by conferences. They appoint pastors to churches who are employees of the conference. For smaller churches in Conneaut, Ohio, were ordered to combine, Wensleydale was appointed as the pastor of this endeavor. The UMC spared no expense for the new church. Wensleydale held his ground against the power of people from the old churches. The church grew and was a beacon of hope for a dying denomination. Wensleydale was a rock star. He was given anything he wanted from the UMC. He became such a celebrity that he had his own personal assistant and secretary, who did all the administrative work. He was not available for the average attendee, as other staff would handle that work. He was a commander enforcing others to enact his wisdom. 15 years later, Wensleydale had a terrible motorcycle accident. These injuries, combined with his Parkinson's, led to him requiring a wheelchair as he struggled to walk. He became despondent as he no longer felt like the Superman he once was. Over the course of a few years, he gained extensive weight. A top hospital informed him the new weight prohibited him from knee replacements and back surgery. He was required to weigh a maximum amount for success. The conference chose to appoint him to the church I was working in. The church was smaller. He no longer had the resources as the old church. Wensleydale felt he could once again be the hero of old due to the church size and location. We warned him of the power struggle within the church. He discarded our warnings and assured us he had encountered much worse at his previous position. The new reality is that the rural church expected their pastor to be easily accessible. We had one secretary with more than enough responsibilities to be his personal assistant. Once he realized this, he focused on his medical issues rather than the church. He found a local doctor from an independent hospital, who believed his current weight wouldn't be a factor. He chose to have the surgery only 2 months after his new appointment. I called him and offered to fill some Sundays by delivering the message, and he assured he'd return a week after surgery. He was in hospital for a month. Rehabilitation was ineffective and he contracted COVID. Once at home, he fell multiple times attempting to do housework well beyond his current capabilities. He was restricted from driving due to the painkillers he was prescribed. A meeting was scheduled and the secretary called him to remind him. He said he would be driving over. The house was literally 200 feet from the church. 20 minutes later, he calls the secretary as he is unsure of his current location. He had driven the opposite direction of the church. On his return drive, another driver calls the police to report erratic driving. He is pulled over in the church parking lot. The painkiller usage is revealed, in which the officers request him to leave the car. He argues he is unable due to his health conditions. The police threaten to arrest him, as they must search the car for additional pills. He attempts to climb out but trips and hits his head on the door. He is currently knocked out. His wife is now present and is able to wake him up while the ambulance is arriving. The EMT assists him onto his mobile scooter, which is rated for less weight. The scooter falls over and breaks. As the EMT once assists, he says it'd probably be better for everyone if I was dead. He is charged with a DUI. The EMT is mandated to report the statement. The only available facility is 3 hours away. The staff and very few committee members are aware of the situation. We are sworn to confidentiality. Rumors swirl as locals had seen multiple police at the church with a car pulled over. None of the rumors are true. We assumed Wensleydale would spend minimal time at the facility. The time turned into weeks. Scott, the personal committee head, petitions the conference to allow him a 3-month medical leave. The final day and final hour before medical leave, he calls me into the office. He begins to chastise and berate me for my inadequate job performance. He had never expressed any of the concerns before. Many were lies. I was angry during those 3 months. I had a meeting with him after leave. He informed me he had spent most of the leave in rehab facilities to determine which medicines would be effective. He stated that he always thought depression was an excuse of weak-minded people with no control. I had told him my struggles with mental health long ago. He now realized his medicine caused depression, so he had a new outlook. He asked if I needed to speak of anything. I hesitated and then described my anger over the horrible things he said before the leave. He apologized and said that was a display of himself. He didn't want anyone to see. The horrible comments were the result of the medication. Due to the DUI and leave, Scott forced Wensleydale to attend a monthly schedule, and have each medical note signed by him and a doctor. When I mentioned Scott had no authority to do this due to Wensleydale being an employee of the conference, Wensleydale agreed and said, "It's just what's going to happen now." This is when I knew he had finally accepted his defeat. Scott had won full control of the church. The next day was my firing. Many allegations brought before me were the criticisms Wensleydale had made before his leave. Criticisms he literally apologized for the previous day. Scott and Wensleydale were working together to dispose of me. Wensleydale had gone from being a Superman in his mind to meaningless. When I was first told of Scott, he was described as a monster. Scott was a career hatchet man. A hatchet man works for a large company that buys out other potential rivals. The hatchet man determines which assets are viable, which included employees. Many times, the company is pieced out and no employees are retained. The only personality that can successfully execute this job is a psychopath. He was both a psychopath and a narcissist. The outgoing committee head told me a story about his son who worked in HR for the large company. Scott had a meeting with management in which he demanded more authority and control because he was the best asset they had. The following day, Scott's department was dissolved. This occurred at the next 2 consecutive jobs of Scott. He only lasted a few months at both jobs. Scott became the head of the committee but never had an actual conversation with me. On a Sunday, I preached. I made a joke. Scott was so insulted that he called an emergency meeting to fire me. The committee voted against Scott. Scott arranged a meeting with me and my committee liaison at a restaurant for breakfast. Scott informed me the meeting is strictly getting to know you and not business. Scott lied. At the end of the meeting, he informed me of his disgust by the joke and other subjects' mental health I had spoken of while preaching. My liaison later informed he was unaware Scott would address any of those issues at breakfast. The committee had actually told Scott how wrong he was about the mental health issue. Scott presented the criticism as a unanimous opinion. I know this personally, and I'm aware this won't stop until I'm fired. They are patient to wait until the next offense for a chance to fulfill their vendetta. The opportunity came 8 months later. I used an illustration during a children's sermon I later found some people were offended by. Scott called another emergency committee meeting. I was informed by my boss, the senior pastor, who also didn't like me, in which he said he'll come to bat for me. The next day I arrived and asked how the meeting went. The pastor looked at me blankly. I asked, "How bad?" The pastor was speechless. He said to give him some time. "So I'm fired. I'll go start packing." I responded. The pastor told me not to leave because a meeting would happen soon. Scott arrives to meet with me and the pastor. The allegations are presented, an inappropriate joke and the illustration. My wife was 8 months pregnant. The committee knew the backlash church members would create if the reasons were made public. The richest members loved me and thought the joke and illustration were great. My wife's pregnancy would create a massive controversy. I was given a 3-month severance dependent on the conditions I did not trash the church on social media, contact the students and parents, initiate conversation with congregation members, or be on church property during those 3 months. My brother informed the severance was hush money. I was quiet and apologetic during the meeting. Following my acknowledgement and signing of the severance paper, Scott began to berate me. He belittled my work and character. I did not respond. Scott finally said, "I don't know why you think it's necessary to say an inappropriate comment every time you're in front of the congregation." Here is where the petty revenge takes place. Scott took pride in his control of both himself and others. Scott had decided to take the moment of me being down to rant against me. Scott felt he had finally been victorious. I was fully aware of Scott's perceived victory. I calmly responded. It couldn't have been every time. I was chosen and substituted for announcements multiple times and said nothing offensive. I disproved Scott's insult. Scott became enraged and began yelling at me. I smiled on the inside. I had exposed Scott for the man he truly is, and caused him to display terrible behavior. The pastor intervened with, "We've already discussed the reasons for termination and don't need to continue." The pastor knew I had baited Scott to embarrassment, and Scott would continue to escalate. Scott and the pastor had informed volunteers would take over my role. They assumed I did so little free labor they could easily replace me. All of the areas folded a few months later because the volunteers were unable to spend a fraction of the time and energy I did. The teenagers no longer trusted the church and never returned. The church posted the position a few months later. 2 years later, with a $7,000 increase in salary as compared to mine, the position hasn't been filled. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 342. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, do hit that like button, thank you kindly. And if you'd like early access to these videos, not a problem. You get that by joining me on Patreon. There's a few of us over there right now. Just click on the link in the description and it'll take you right to it. Support me there for as little as $1 or more a month. You'll also find a link to the Hellfreezer merchandise page in the description. And if you really enjoyed today's video, then why not leave a tip? You can do that by clicking on the heart with a $sign in the middle underneath the video. But as we always say, and we always mean here, it's not necessary, but I am very grateful if you choose to. Alright, let's see. No other business today, so let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is... This seems to be a controversial thing, right? My favorite flavor of ice cream is mint choc chip. Always has been, I just like it. Do you or do you not like it? Because apparently, some people think it tastes like toothpaste, which is what we call an incorrect opinion. But, you know, whatever, to each their own and all that sort of thing. But let me know what you think in a comment below. And before we go, we'll have the answer of the day from a previous video. And this question was in relation to how do you feel about food delivery apps? Today's answer comes from Avery Satos, or is it Avery Satos? Do correct me if I'm... Do feel free to correct me if I'm... well, if they're both wrong, definitely correct me. Their answer is, I use the one I got a free premium service on for the restaurants downtown that are too annoying to park at. I always get carryout though. Eat at home instead. Quite right too. Thank you for your answer, Avery. Or Avery. And with that, I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.